Hello, everybody, and welcome to one of the most exciting days of the year, filled with drama, intrigue, in the know, rumors, false rumors, and everything that goes on with that. It's transfer deadline day. And here at Rams Review HQ, we're busy at the keyboards, not trolling anybody, but trying to get information on who Darby's going to sign as they're in the midst of a 7 league game losing streak. But aside from that, we brought on a special guest who was previously with us on the Rams Review podcast, but someone who has intimate knowledge of transfer deadlines days as both a player, as assistant manager, and as a manager as well. It's none other than Paul Simpson. Paul, welcome back to the Rams Review podcast. It's great to see you again.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Are you, Paul? When you hear transfer deadline day with your previous experiences, do you get excited, or is there just kind of like that pit in your stomach where you want to go like vomit?
Yeah, it's a horrible day. It really is. In my experience as a manager, I always wanted to try and get as much business done as possible as early as possible, rather than leaving it to the last minute because it becomes manic and it just becomes a bun fight on deadline day as you're leading up to the final minutes of the schedule. I have to say, last January, when I was manager at Carlisle United, that was probably the most chaotic transfer deadline day that I've ever been involved in. But I think that was sort of the situation that we found ourselves in, where we were in the bottom places of the league and we were really struggling in League One. So we were desperately trying to bring a striker in, and things fell through that you've been working on for weeks and weeks, and then you're at a point where you're scrambling around trying to find another option. On that particular day, we brought 2 players in. One of them failed his medical and we had to send him back. So that all got knocked on the head. That is literally an hour before the deadline closes. And then the other one was also struggling with a slight injury that, as a group of staff, with the CEO involved, we made a decision to take a gamble. Unfortunately, the gamble didn't work. So the different scenarios cause you to have more or less panic than certainly I like anyway.
And our deadline days in January, are they way more manic than ones in the summer because of
Yeah.
the condensedness nature of the January window being only 4 weeks rather than like 8?
Yeah, they are more manic, but also people know they've got you in a tight situation as well. So they start asking for more money. Players and agents ask for more money. Clubs are always demanding money to let the players come out. So the summer window is certainly an easy one because you've got a bigger range of players to choose from, in that you've got all of the freedom of contract players and then others who you've done your work on over the weeks leading up to it. But the truth is, in football now, the recruitment process is such an important part of the role. It's done all year round. We're preparing in the summer, and once you get through August, you're now then preparing for the January one. So it's not just 4 weeks. You've done a load of months of prep. But even at that point, you get to January and things that you've worked on and irons that you have in the fire, they suddenly get pulled away from you. Players go elsewhere, they get in the team and start doing well. And it's a bloody minefield, if I'm going to be honest with you. And it's a tough period to be involved in. And I have to say, the position I'm in at the moment, where I'm not with a club, I'm much enjoying the January window.
You could just put Sky Sports on and just mellow out for the evening, right?
Definitely, yeah. Although I'm glad I don't see Jim White in his yellow tie anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah, both of us are not wearing yellow because we're not contracted by Sky, so that's perfectly
Yeah.
okay. I don't know why that became the official color of deadline day, but
No, no
whatever.
idea.
Um, is it a case as well, Paul, as you're going through this scouting process, like you said, scouting's like a year-round process now.
Mm.
I would assume that there's a lot of kind of tight ropes that you have to walk as well, because you want to be able to maybe let somebody know that you're interested, but you
Yeah,
can't tap them up. And there's a
no,
very fine line there. So for you as a manager, let's say it's October, November timeframe, you're worried about results, 2 games a week, trying to get a team to perform, training, injuries, managing all this. How much time do you dedicate in that close window season to transfers? Is that just something you say to the CEO? You might want to have a word, or you just let them go and do the thing, and you're like, I don't want to know what goes on. I've given you a
Yeah.
list, and we'll see what
No, I
happens.
mean, I'm always have a handle on what's going on. I mean, the way that I've worked it at clubs is that you have a head scout or head of recruitment or whatever title they want to be, and it's up to them to go and do all the groundwork to go and find out who fits the bill for what we want and come up with some options. And then what I tended to do, maybe once a week, I would sit down with the recruitment staff and the analyst, and I would have a look at the clips of them, and they'd talk me through, in the days now where you've got all of these databases that you can check on match minutes and I'm not a big believer in paying a lot of attention to XG and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't care if it was a good or a bad chance. If they've finished it, then brilliant. If they haven't, it's a miss. Whether it's an XG, I don't even know what the numbers mean. So that for me is a load of rubbish. I'm more about knowing. I want to know the player. I want to know all about them, and I want to know, what they do, what they could bring to the team, where they would fit in with our team. So I'd sit with the recruitment staff and we'd go through them, and then I'd look. So they bring the options to me. I'd go, well, I like those ones. There might be three of those I like. Go and find out if they're available, find out whether there's an interest, and then we go for what we believe is the best option. But if you're realistic, a club like Carlisle United, we're not going to get the best option. We're probably going to get the second or the third best option, but they've still got to fit the bill for what we want. And I think that's the frustrating thing that, if I go back to last January and also the summer, because of the situation we were in, we weren't top of every player's priority list. We weren't top of their list of where they wanted to go. So it becomes a real challenge for you. It's exciting, but it's also a real ball ache that it takes up a lot of your time when you're trying to do everything else inside the football club.
And Paul, I wanted to kind of talk about that and transition a little bit here because that's a really interesting point. Obviously, Derby's at the bottom end of the championship. They're very much struggling and everything like that. And, very similar situation what Carlisle were in last season, very much struggling. And like you said, players are going to probably sit there and see the situation at Carlisle and go, maybe, but
Yeah.
there's something else.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And it kind of strings it
Yeah.
out. Do you feel like, I mean, there's obviously tiers, right, to players' interests and things like that. Do you
Mm.
feel like in the League One, League Two level, sometimes they're letting a little bit more dominoes fall than what they are at Championship? Like when you were at Derby, obviously it had to have been significantly easier, flying high in the Championship,
Mm.
had the momentum, and then even Championship clubs have to wait for dominoes to fall. Like they have to wait John
Yeah,
Duran to go so Marcus Rashford can go, so then they can let a guy go. And then is it
absolutely.
is it same at Carlisle where you're waiting for other more dominoes to fall, and then does it make it infinitely more difficult
Yeah.
in the League One and League Two to bring players in as it would be at the top end of the Championship?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's how it works. You are waiting for something else to drop. And there's been many a times where we'd make an inquiry for a player and the clubs will say, well, if we can find a replacement, we're looking to bring one in. If we get that one, then he can come to you. And we know that they've probably said that to a couple of other clubs as well, because there's such a small pool of players that there'll be a lot of clubs looking at those same players, and you do have to wait for things to fall into place. What I would say on Derby County's favour is that it is a fantastic football club. They've got the facilities to die for, with a stadium, with a huge fan base, really passionate fan base, and a really good place to play. They've got a training ground which is second to none. So they have all of those facilities in place. When you start going down the food chain, and we're talking about Carlisle United, where we had a really strong fan base. We were losing every week, so that knocks people off because they don't feel as though they're confident enough to go into a losing team. Um, the training facilities were abysmal. So as a player, you're looking and going, well, hang on a minute, I'm in a club where I'm maybe settled but not playing. Do I really want to go and expose myself to that situation? And a lot of times they turn it down because they don't want to do it. My view was always, I want to play football, so when I was at Derby, I went to Sheffield United on loan. When I was at Wolves, I went to Walsall on loan just because I wanted to play football. It's not the same now. Players are a little bit different. I'm not saying they don't want to play, but they're not about making appearances. They're happy to stay on their contracts and not put themselves into the firing line of going to a club that's struggling.
And yeah, I mean, sometimes they get on these cushy deals, and you see these players in the Premier League, and they're like, I mean, like the lad at Spurs, Brendan Austin, the goalkeeper, he's 26 and he made his first team start for like Tottenham. I'm like, you're 26. You should have played
Yeah,
100 games by now. And he's making his debut. And then they sign another guy, Kinski from the Czech Republic. And it's like, well, obviously he doesn't have a future at Tottenham, but he's going to stay there. So it's like a very weird situation because that's always the one thing when we met up first. I always remember I was like, Paul said, you've got to go get games when you're a player. And Derby have just sold Aaron Cashin to Brighton and Hove Albion, played 144 games for Derby in like 4 years, and he's 23. And I'm like, that's going to help him significantly later on because he has so much
absolutely.
more experience.
Yeah, I think it's more difficult for a goalkeeper, if I'm honest with you, because a lot of clubs now, particularly these Premier League clubs, they collect goalkeepers just to have a team of goalkeepers, and they have one or two goalkeeper coaches working with this little team out on its own. And they, for somebody like Brandon, who I had in one of my England squads, I think is a real top talented young goalkeeper, Brand. But they probably wouldn't let him go out because they say, well, we need him as a training goalkeeper. Well, that's not good enough for a young footballer. They need to go and play games. And I think that's really important. But clubs clubs don't look at it that way. I mean, we inquired about taking Brandon Austin on loan, and they wouldn't let him go out because they want them as a training keeper and they want to develop them there. But goalkeepers develop by playing games, not training. They need to play games. They need to get match understanding. They need to get positional awareness and starting positions when balls are coming straight down the middle of the pitch, starting positions from when crosses are coming in from left and right, and can I go and collect it, can I punch it, do I have to stay at home, all of these decisions. And you can only get so much of those decisions in training. The real bulk of it comes from match practice and real life situations.
And yeah, I mean, it's difficult for a goalkeeper because they don't get rotated out as much, and no one's ever going to play a two goalkeeper formation. That's just
Yeah.
they're just not going to do that.
We thought about it at Carlisle last year and we kept
Just
losing,
line
but
them up on the goal
we,
mount and
we
just
weren't
go.
allowed.
Paul, I'm going to ask you in a couple of minutes about maybe some transfer deadline day stories that you can share, not giving anything personal away or whatever, any crazy stories or some of your crazy experiences. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about, obviously you had success with the England under 20s. I think success is much underselling this. How proud are you to see players like Morgan Gibbs White and those kind of players that came through with you having success at the top end of the Premier League?
I think it's fantastic. I really do. I think for the whole plan that England had with the development teams to give them a pathway, to give them experiences was fantastic. Really well put together by Dan Ashworth and Matt Crocker. And we had, I mean, Morgan and people like Morgan Gibbs White, Phil Foden, Jadon Sancho, they were all involved with the under-17s. But my 20s group, people like Dom Calvert-Lewin, Dom Solanke, Lewis Cook, Ainsley Maitland-Niles, who obviously had a spell in Arsenal's team, but has had to move on. Kyle Walker-Peters, all of these lads. And then you then look at the next sort of tier down with Freddie Woodman playing regular championship football, John Joe Kenny going over to play in the Bundesliga. These lads are all making a great career. And it was a brilliant time to be involved with the FA and to see these lads develop and to see what sort of characters they were. Because, when I went into the FA, everybody had this perception that young English footballers weren't good enough and weren't good people. And when I went in, it was the absolute opposite. They're really talented and they are top lads as well who really wanted to make the most of their ability, which was great to see.
And was it something that the FA wanted to pull all the senior team down to the youth teams all together? Did they pull all you coaches together and all the people who were running the teams and said, this is the culture we want to create? This is how we want to get this. This is how you're going to stay on message with being able to promote these people?
Absolutely. That was the way we worked. We had I don't like using it, but it was called the England DNA. I think it's a bit twee when you say DNA, but there was a philosophy about how they wanted to go about it, which was really, really effective. So from under 15s through to the 20s. We had a way of playing. So it was a common language that we used with the players, and it was a common style of play. Now it was up to the coaches then to tweak it how they wanted to work that and how they played. We wanted to play 4-3-3, but you could play your 4-3-3 however you wanted. You could go two strikers and a 10 and three midfielders, or you could play a 9, 11 and a 7 and three mid. It was up to the coach himself to actually tweak that framework and work from it. But it was more about the common language. So say, for example, Morgan Gibbs White was playing in the under 17s and I wanted him to come and play for the 19s. And he comes up and I start talking about 5 lanes and a high press and a mid block. He's not sort of going, what they're talking about. That's not what we say in the under 17. So we used a common language. And it took years to prepare for it. I was really fortunate that I jumped onto the under 20 group who'd had sort of 3 years working together on this style of play and this philosophy. But you could see that everybody knew what they were doing, and it made the job as the coach much easier. And the way that we looked at it, although we only had the players for maybe 50, 55 days a year on camp. If you then I'd do that over 3 or 4 years, it's 3 or 4 times 50, 55 days. So you're then going up to 200 days, 210 days that they've done all of this prep. But it was a really good plan. Unfortunately, they're not getting the success that we had in 2017, but there are a lot of these players who have gone through and they're now taking part in the senior squads.
And that's raised the expectations of the English national team as it's kind of grown and developed. And now it's a favorite for all the tournaments, when before you were kind of like, maybe quarterfinalists at best. But now when England don't go and win a tournament, it's a disappointment. And obviously England's entering a whole new era in March. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what comes of that.
Yeah, it's actually allowed us, and Gareth Southgate has to take a lot of credit for this. It's allowed us to be competing at the latter stages of tournaments instead of either not qualifying for finals or getting knocked out in group stages. We've now had some consistency over the last few tournaments. We've not quite got that final step yet. Well, we haven't got it to be able to go and actually lift a trophy, but hopefully we should be able to do that as in the next few years.
Fair enough. And Paul, you mentioned the whole DNA thing kind of sounds a little bit corny when you're talking about it. And that leads me into my segue, because I believe when you were at Derby had a season ticket campaign that said it's in your DNA, Derby now and always. So I
Yeah.
don't know whether it's you and you just get stuck in these situations, or you're glossing over the fact that you like the word DNA and you're telling people to use it. Paul, as we sit here with a few minutes left, transfer deadline day, are there any stories you can share from either your time at Derby or from your time at Carlisle about how to give people watching, and myself as well, a perspective on how quickly things shift, or like weird things footballers ask for, or a deal that, like, the fax machine got jammed or something and you weren't able to do it?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my head around something that happened. I mean, the most ridiculous one we had at Derby was when we brought the big Spanish centre back in, and his name's gone off me at this moment. But
Raul Albentosa.
Raul
Yes.
Albertosa.
And I was in England when you guys were going to sign him, and I was
Yeah.
so into that. And I blame you for making me never trust a transfer again.
Well,
I was well into it.
all of that deal was ridiculous because I remember Steve saying to me, Simo, I'm going over to Spain on Saturday. Straight after the game, I need to go over because I've got to go and see the centre back. I'm like, all right, who's that? He said, Albentosa. I was like, oh, interesting. A lot of letters to go on his shirt. Big job for the kit man. But anyway, he's planning it. And then at the end of the game, I said to him, I said, Gaffer, do you not need to hurry up and get going here? I thought you were catching a flight. He went, no, I'm not going now. I said, why not? He said, I've just found out today that he's suspended for the game tonight, so I can't go over. I was like, all right, so when's the next game? He said, we're just going to sign him. And I'm saying, whoa, hang on a minute. I will not. Do you not need to go and have a live view of him? Because that's how we worked. Steve or myself would always go and have a final live view. And he went, no, I'm being told it's definite. So Mel Morris put on an unbelievable performance. He flew Chris Evans over on his private jet, and Chris met Raul Albertosa in different places, flew him back over, picked him up in a I don't know what it was, something like a Bentley or a McLaren sports car, something ridiculous, drove him into the train. It was like the full red carpet got rolled out, and he signed. And on the I always remember we had a game at home on the Saturday, and one of the other staff, I think it was Lee Glover, took a session with the players who weren't involved. And Alban Tosa trained in this session, and somebody kicked him, and he was rolling around on the floor crying, physically crying. And Steve told me this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, we've signed a centre half. I'm hoping for a big, hairy ass centre half who's going to head and kick everybody in the championship. And he's took a knock and crying. And it just was the whole red carpet treatment was given, but it turned out to be a really poor signing for us. And that was a big signing that we wanted to try and push to get up. So there's that one. I remember at Preston, there was a lot of talk of David Nugent going, and we had a game on the night of deadline day, and at half time a message got sent to me that Everton had put a bid in for Nuge, and he might be going. And I'm thinking, why would you put a bid in at half time during the game? But as it was, he didn't go. He then went in the summer where there was a lot more time to do it, and had Harry Redknapp and Roy Keane haggling over him, and he eventually left and went to Portsmouth with Harry. But it's just manic. And like I said, last year was my worst, last January, where I had two players in and doing medicals, and you're desperate for a player who's going to come and help you out, and then it just falls flat on its backside because they fail a medical, and it leaves you scrambling around at the last minute. So I have to say, I am so glad I'm not involved in it tonight. But I'll be watching and seeing who moves where.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially with, the stock profit and sustainability rules, and you have FFP, and like
Mm,
John Duran's gone to Al Nasser, and you're sitting there and you're like, why? He was doing
yeah,
really well. Why would you sell him?
yeah,
But then when they're
yeah.
getting 70 million for a guy and
Money.
it works out for the profit rules, and they're
Yeah,
bringing in Marcus Rashford. Yeah, sometimes it just seems weird. Like, yeah, you just get these signings. How difficult is it, Paul, to have a line in the sand and say, like, this is what we're going to pay. I
mm,
want to sign you, Paul.
yeah,
I'm going to pay you this. We've all agreed. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, he wants 500 more, or
yeah.
he wants to be a guaranteed starter or whatever. How difficult is it on deadline day when you're desperate for, let's say,
Really.
for a midfielder, and you're like,
Yeah.
I have to have somebody in a warm
Mm.
body. And then the parameters start shifting. Do you have to have those like hard lines in the sand where you're like, I'm just not doing this? Something's just,
Yeah, I do. I spend a club's money as if it's my own. So I do have that, and I've been in a situation in the last two windows where I've got an ownership group saying, no, just give him it. And I'm like, no, that's not the right thing to do. That doesn't give the right impression to the rest of the dressing room, because players talk. Players will say, oh, I'm earning this and I'm earning that. And then the ones who are not earning that sort of money then start knocking on the door and give you a problem. So I try to dig my heels in and say, no, no, I'm not doing it that way. And it's difficult because you want the player, but I think you've got to respect the financial position of a football club and make sure that you try and do it properly. Um, Sometimes it costs you because you'd end up not getting the player, and ultimately that can affect whether you keep your job or not. So it's difficult, but I think you have to be respectful of the football club and the finances and spend it as if you are in control of those purse strings.
fair enough. And Paul, I would like to say I'm gonna find a nice, quiet, relaxing, warm place to sit down, have a fruity beverage, and watch deadline day coverage. But it's freezing here in Washington, so I'm gonna hunker down with like a sleeping bag and 5 blankets and watch deadline day. But I hope you're able to sit quietly, enjoy deadline day for once, and not have a panic attack over over the manic ones in the
Yeah.
past. But
Well, there'll
Paul
certainly be no
Simpson,
panic from me, Corey. I'll be totally chilled tonight.
Paul Simpson. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on deadline day. I hope you're doing well, and we hope to see you in the dugout soon.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, and have a good day.